Day 86 of the Atlantic hurricane season, day 104 in the Eastern Pacific. We currently have a tropical storm in the Eastern Pacific, Tropical Storm Evo, which is currently moving towards the Baja California Peninsula, but is not likely to threaten that area for much longer, if at all, because it's weakening very quickly and all warnings that were in effect not long ago have been lifted. We currently have an invest in the Western Pacific, 91W, in between the Philippines and Palau, and Tropical Depression Pewa, which is still going just about in the northern Western Pacific area. Well out at sea, not affecting any areas of land at this time. So these are the current three systems in the Pacific at the moment. We did also have an invest in the Central Pacific, 93C, which was active south of the Hawaiian Islands, but that's been declassified very recently in the past hour or so. In the Atlantic Ocean we have 95L, which is currently an invest inland over the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, and that currently has a medium chance of development, around 30%. That may change slightly as time goes on, especially at the midnight UTC update, so we'll see what it says there, but as of right now it is 30%. The Indian Ocean remaining fairly quiet at this time, which is fairly normal for this time of year. Not too much activity is expected, at least until October, around October, maybe November, until we see a real storm out there. The sea surface temperatures then in the Eastern Pacific, first of all, you can see warm waters off the coast of Mexico, the mainland, the Baja California Peninsula jutting out there as well. To the west of that, water temperatures are much cooler and it is not sustainable for tropical cyclone development, so it's no wonder that the current storm Evo is weakening. In the Atlantic, the Gulf of Mexico remains the warmest point, especially the western half of the Gulf of Mexico, around 30-degree waters here. Some areas off the southern coast of Cuba as well, around 30 degrees here as well. As far as the rest of the Atlantic is concerned, quite a lot of areas above 26 degrees, certainly warm enough for tropical cyclone development in the main area of development in the Atlantic. In the Western Pacific, not too much of concern here either in terms of sea surface temperatures. Very warm waters for the majority of the ocean, at least extending up to about 30 degrees north, around 26 degrees or more. Some areas at 30 degrees, especially out in the open Pacific in the central region of that. So let's take a look now at Tropical Storm Evo, currently with winds of 40 miles per hour. Earlier it peaked at 45. The current pressure is 1000 millibars, positions 22.9 degrees north, 114.1 degrees east, and it's expected to move towards the northwest, weakening to a tropical depression very soon, in the next 12 hours or less, and eventually turning into a remnant low in about 24 to 48 hours time as it stalls off the coast of the Baja California Peninsula. So obviously with it, the storm slowing down in movement and stalling, the rains could be a concern for the coast of the Baja California Peninsula, but all warnings have been lifted and there are no storm conditions expected. Any storm conditions currently prevailing will likely die down very soon, if not already. Invest 95L then, currently with winds of 25 miles per hour, pressures 1009 millibars, current position 17.4 degrees north, 90.8 degrees west, expected to move towards the west-northwest, currently over land, not expected to develop into a tropical cyclone really, but a tropical depression could occur as a result of this system, maybe even a tropical storm if it's really going right for it, and it shifts towards the north slightly over the Gulf of Mexico before making another landfall in Mexico itself, and then moving through and possibly emerging over on the Eastern Pacific side. And we also have Tropical Depression Pewa, which is currently still going. Not too much to say about it, to be honest. Currently with winds of 35 miles per hour, pressure's 996 millibars, current position is 28.2 degrees north, 167.6 degrees east, and it's expected to move towards the west-northwest initially, curving towards the north, and then eventually towards the northeast as it heads towards 35-40 degrees north, and obviously by then it will turn extratropical as water temperatures fade and conditions generally deteriorate for the storm. And indeed, it's only hanging on as a tropical depression at this time. It could degenerate into an extratropical storm or remnant low very soon. So let's take a look at the current shear maps then. You can see the Atlantic first of all, a high swathe of shear north of the Cape Verde Islands at the moment. The same too in parts of the Caribbean, especially over Puerto Rico. That's the main high point there. You can see in the central Atlantic towards the east on the low latitudes, low shear amounts here. So any tropical waves that end up in that region could develop. We'll see about that one. In the Eastern Pacific you can see here high shear conditions just to the north of the current storm Evo, so that shear increasing where that storm is headed, and that will likely contribute to the storm's demise. Obviously sea surface temperatures are dropping off a cliff too. but shear is lowering in that area. As far as the rest of the Eastern Pacific is concerned, low shear amounts in lower latitudes and high shear amounts further north. In the Western Pacific, fairly similar as well. You can see that L sign, which is where tropical depression Pewa is at the moment. High shear amounts to its west, and that's where the storm's headed as well, so that will certainly tear it apart at least at some point or another. As far as the rest of the Western Pacific is concerned, high shear just south of the current Invest 91W, which may interfere with development. In the Atlantic, you can see this is the current water vapor imagery. You can see a load of dry air in the central area of the Atlantic, in the lower and mid latitudes, and some moist air around, moist conditions around the Lesser Antilles at this time, with that little tropical wave moving through at the moment. You can see the Eastern Pacific, there's a lot of dry air here towards the central area, east of Hawaii, almost as far as the American continent, but lots of dry air here, and that's will also be contributing to the demise of Evo. And if two of these three conditions weren't there, then Evo may have continued towards the Baja California Peninsula as a tropical storm, but as it is, everything's going against it at the moment, and it will likely degenerate very soon. This is the Western Pacific. You can see most of it is moist in terms of conditions. You can see 91W currently just to the east of the Philippines, a very moist atmosphere around that, just a little bit of a perhaps neutral pocket around the Okinawa Island region of Japan. Looking at the Western Pacific overview then in the past 24 hours or so, this one's centred on 91W, just east of the Philippines. It's been moving through the Western Pacific recently, moving through Palau, and now it's onto the Philippines, and will probably move through the Philippines towards the west-northwest and may develop into a tropical storm. Probably will stay away from the Philippines, actually, just to the east. That's certainly what the models are suggesting. More on that very shortly. This is the floater imagery currently of Tropical Storm Evo, it probably won't keep hold of tropical storm status for much longer. Looking at this imagery as well, you can see how the heavy rainfall has been deteriorating quite dramatically over the past few hours, and the centre of circulation is increasingly becoming more exposed. We also have Invest 95L, which is currently over land in the Yucatan Peninsula, so nothing spectacular occurring from that one, as you would expect from a storm that's over land. But if it does move towards the north and move over the southern Gulf of Mexico, there may be a chance that it becomes a tropical depression, or maybe even a tropical storm, but I very much doubt that at this stage. So this is a CMC model then. You can see another hurricane forming in the Eastern Pacific, staying out at sea, and another storm forming in the Atlantic as well, moving from a tropical wave that moves through the Atlantic. You can see it forming there in the central Atlantic and then curving towards the northwest, possibly as a hurricane, possibly affecting the Lesser Antilles. The ECMWF model is fairly similar with the Eastern Pacific storm, having that forming and then curving towards the northeast and then back towards the northwest. As for the Atlantic, I believe it does predict a system as well, similar to the CMC, possibly not as strong, but you can see definitely a system there approaching the Lesser Antilles at the end of that run. The GFS model also predicts that storm in the Eastern Pacific, possibly becoming a hurricane and then stalling and then moving towards the northeast eventually. As for the Atlantic, I believe it's not really predicting much. It is predicting a bit of a system there, and another system moving through the Cape Verde Islands at the very end of that one. The NavGem model also has a storm in the Eastern Pacific, forming quite close to the Mexican coastline and then moving out to sea. As for the Atlantic, not too much in terms of storm development according to the NavGem model. The GFDL, you can see Evo weakening there initially, and then a new storm forming off the Mexican coastline, becoming a tropical storm at the end of that run, which I believe is about 6 or 7 days out, if I'm not mistaken. The HWRF model, let's take a look at this one. Evo quickly dissipating and that new storm forming, possibly becoming a hurricane off the Mexican coastline towards the end of that run there, moving towards the west-northwest. So let's take a look now at the current intensity comparisons. This is for Evo. You can see how it's peaked and is now weakening and will eventually become a tropical depression and indeed a remnant low as it slowly weakens in intensity of wind speed, but going down to about 25 miles per hour in about 3 or 4 days time. This is the tracks. This is what the models predict of the track map. It's moved towards the west, relocated as a matter of fact, not too long ago. So that means that the storm's less likely to affect land areas and is going to move towards the north-northwest generally and stay away from any landfall at least. Looking at the shear comparisons then, you can see how they are fairly low. You can see how they go to about 10 to 15, which is a little bit towards the moderate side, which will possibly interfere with anything that goes on there. And sea surface temperatures are certainly dropping like a rock at this time, around 27 degrees at the moment, but falling very rapidly to about 24, 25, which is certainly not enough for tropical storm development. And the relative humidity is expected to drop slowly as well over the next few days to around 40% eventually, which is somewhat unconducive for development. So let's take a look at the current model runs for the Western Pacific. Then the CMC model first of all has a new storm forming in the Western Pacific. That's 91W, forming near the Philippines and then moving towards the northwest, making landfall in Taiwan, possibly as a typhoon. Yes, that's another one there, and then skirting the coast of China. The GFS model, let's take a look at this one now, also has that system forming, staying further out to sea and moving through the Japanese islands before crossing the mainland, not too far from Tokyo by the looks of things, moving towards the northeast at the end of that run, probably as a strong tropical storm, turning extra tropical at that stage. So let's take a look now at the overall predictor season scores for August 25th. Willie remains in first place with 55 points. TS Debbie is in second place with a smile, 49 points, and BFDIA Submission 2 in third place with 49 points at this time. Willie back falling from the top 3 into fourth with 48 points. So far 197 entrants to date, and the average user score is 19.0. It's gone up 0.9 since the last update, which is certainly good news for anyone who's predicted. You can submit your own storm totals at the website force13.com/interactive. Just submit your totals for the Northern Hemisphere and see how you do by the end of the year. So what happened on this day then, August the 25th? In 1969, Tropical Storm Eve formed near Florida. In 1971, Chloe made landfall in Belize as a depression and dissipated. In 1973, Tropical Storm Christine formed over Africa. In 1979, Tropical Storm David formed. And in 1983, Tropical Depression Barry made landfall in central Florida. There it is pictured just before landfall. In 1989, Tropical Storm Kiko formed in the eastern Pacific. The next year, Tropical Storm Hortense formed in the central Atlantic. In 1993, Hillary made landfall on the Baja California Peninsula. In 1994, Hurricane John passed Johnston Atoll, resulting in damages of $15 million. That's just a few days before that picture when it was a Category 5 storm. And in 1997, Tropical Storm Jamina formed in the eastern Pacific. In 2003, Ignacio made landfall in the Baja California Peninsula, resulting in 2 fatalities and $21 million in damages. I believe that's the one that's pictured there. Tropical Storm Fabian formed in the Atlantic as well on that day. And also Tropical Storm Crovan made landfall along the Vietnam-China border as a tropical storm, obviously, in 2003 after it moved through Hainan Island, I believe, into the Chinese-Vietnamese border. In 2004, Tropical Storm Frances formed in the eastern Atlantic. In 2005, Katrina made landfall in Florida as a Category 1 storm, resulting in 14 fatalities and $623 million in damages. Irwin formed in the eastern Pacific on that same day. Gustav formed in the Caribbean in 2008, and Tropical Storm Earl formed near the Cape Verde Islands in 2010. There it is pictured, forming on that day, August the 25th, on this day. And you can track any storm that forms, including the ones that are currently active, at the website force13.com/stormtracking.html. That's the main page for the storm tracking information. And you're presented there with the overview map, which shows all the current storms along the map, including invests as well, with tables at the top and bottom showing their intensities and indeed any warnings that are currently in effect. There were warnings in effect in Mexico as a result of Evo, but those have been. However, rainfall from the storm could result in localised flooding along the Mexican coastline there in the Baja California Peninsula. Certainly not one to let your guard down on, as it remains a tropical storm and is likely to affect the area. But that's currently the situation with all those storms out there as well. Pewa still going as well, just about in the Western Pacific, but not affecting any land areas. And you can also follow us on our social pages, YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. We're on all 3 of those mediums. Just search us on any of those, which one ever takes your fancy, and you should find us fairly easily enough. And please do show your support by doing the usual means of engagement, liking, subscribing, commenting, favoriting, or indeed anything else that you may be able to think of that I cannot right now. And if you have any comments, just put it below the video on this YouTube video, and you can also send in a private message if you wish as well, through YouTube or indeed any other mediums where you can get me on any of those. It's also 92 days until Hurricane Week 2013. Work started on that not too long ago. For more information, visit the website force13.com/HW2013.html. That's the main page for it. It's certainly an exciting prospect and it will be the biggest project of its kind, I suppose, that I've ever made, at least anyway. It'll be much longer than last year's, which was long enough as it was, and it'll certainly be interesting, at least in my opinion. You can also visit the forum as well, where we have discussions going on about the current storms. force13.com/forum. You can find all of these things on the website. The next bulletin will be coming up at around midnight UTC on Monday morning. That's the 26th of August 2013. But until then, that's all for now.